Howdy, howdy. My name's Trishaly. Welcome to the Common Sense Cowgirl. I was just listening to the radio and I heard this guy apparently used to work for the Bush administration, and he was comparing this resignation of Michael Flynn from the Trump cabinet to Iran-Contra and Watergate. Oh, really? I don't think so. Actually, if you wanted to do an analysis of Watergate and Iran-Contra, you would very quickly realize that the reason that Donald Trump and most of the people on this planet have a strong distrust of major media outlets, it is because of the lack of investigative reporting into Watergate as well as Iran-Contra. I think about if we would have had the internet during the Watergate scandal or during Iran-Contra, people, the world would be such a different place. Radio and television, since its inception, has been a tool for propaganda. And in the case of Watergate, from the investigation that I've done into it, it looks like they set Nixon up. Now, Richard Nixon had been frightened about the potential of him facing assassination like JFK did. And so he had selected a vice president, which he felt would ensure that no assassination attempt would be made, because he figured nobody wanted this guy to be in the presidency. So the Republican Party, run by the criminal Bush cartel, they were able to install their globalist hero, Gerald Ford. They installed him as Nixon's vice president, and then they did this big frame up. From the looks of it, they specifically set up Richard Nixon so that they could get their guy, Gerald Ford, in.
If he picks a guy that the old guard wants, well, then that guy's only a heartbeat away. It's setting up beautifully. You take out that guy, your guy's a heartbeat away, and everything's back to normal then, right, Larry?
So Mike Pence fits that bill?
I think he would, because he's getting rave reviews from the old status quo of the Republicans, who were all part of the dump Trump movement. And now apparently, if he brings this guy on board, I guess they'll accept Donald for a while.
In the case of Iran-Contra, oh my gosh, they pretty much completely covered up the whole cocaine operation. And what most people don't realize is that when George H.W. Bush realized that he wasn't going to win re-election for the presidency, he installed his partner, Bill Clinton. So, and the crazy thing is George H.W. was not only partners with Bill Clinton, having Barry Seal deliver his cocaine for the CIA to Mena, Arkansas, where Clinton was the governor. So when George H.W. knew that he wasn't going to win re-election, he was able to install a Democratic puppet, aka Clinton. And there's a guy, an ex-CIA guy, Chip Tatum, who apparently has audio recordings that prove that George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton were involved in cocaine operations out of Mena, Arkansas. They talk about the guns for hostages. That's what the media reported. But the truth of the matter is that there was this whole cocaine operation going on that nobody reported on. There was reporters who tried to bring some of this stuff to light that were killed. With the internet now, they can't really pull this crap on us anymore, and we're able to spread information far and wide and find out what's really going on. So with this Michael Flynn thing, I think I pretty much have discovered where the leak came from. I've heard a lot of people saying that Reince Priebus is the leaker, and I don't know that much about Reince Priebus, but I do know that Mike Pence is a serious danger, and if something happens to Donald Trump, we do not want another Bush water carrier in office.
He could not have done worse if he had chosen Jeb Bush. You can read the article for yourself, of course, but I'm going to take you through it and try to line up the dots for you so that they connect themselves. First, some background. The 9/11 attacks were carried out by the Bush administration. You can prove that Cheney was the leader of this operation. the purpose of which was to justify spending trillions of dollars on defense instead of spending it on education, infrastructure, manufacturing technology, or anything else that might have been of any benefit to anyone. For the killers, however, the problem with the 9/11 attacks was that there was no evidence connecting any countries to the attacks, so they had to manufacture some evidence. In October of 2001, about 2 weeks after the 9/11 attacks, letters containing a deadly powder laced with anthrax were mailed to two leading Democratic senators, Tom Daschle and Patrick Leahy. The plan was to blame these attacks on Iraq, and part of that plan was to show that the anthrax used in the letters was the product of a very advanced laboratory, like you might, if you were a liar, claim existed in Iraq. The problem was that Attorney General John Ashcroft and the FBI, and especially the scientists involved, were not cooperating in the plot, and had reported honestly that their investigation showed that the anthrax was domestic in origin. The scientists responsible for investigating this issue knew that there was no evidence that the anthrax had been genetically modified to make it more dangerous, and they knew it immediately, within days, when they began treating the victims, and the victims immediately got better. Pence knew this. This is a press conference outside the Capitol on October 27, 2001.
Health officials have urged us to encourage everyone who has been in our office since the close of business on October the 11th to begin immediately to obtain and utilize an antibiotic regimen under their doctor's consultation. My family and our staff are all well and in good health, and we will all begin prophylactic treatment of antibiotics after I leave this press conference today.
There would have been no point in taking the antibiotics if the anthrax used had been genetically modified to resist the antibiotics. At this same press conference, Pence introduced
Commander Greg Martin, who is the head of infectious diseases at Bethesda Naval Hospital,
who had said that the mailed anthrax
has been very sensitive to all of the typical antibiotics that can be used for naturally occurring anthrax.
Which, again, means that the anthrax had not been modified to make it resistant to drugs. Within a couple of months, the scientists had done more work to prove that the material had not been genetically altered, and they told Congressman Mike Pence and everyone else in January. And then, 9 months after the first finding by the scientists that this was ordinary unmodified anthrax, and 6 months after the definitive genome sequencing, which, by the way, also showed that the anthrax had come from illegal U.S. Army bioweapons stockpiles, Pence wrote and published a letter to Attorney General John Ashcroft accusing him of lying to protect terrorists because Ashcroft found that the source of these anthrax attacks was domestic when, says Pence, there is significant evidence to suggest an international source for these materials. Material found in my office and in others on Capitol Hill was finely milled weapons-grade anthrax that had been genetically modified to increase its virulence. Now, this is a lie. Pence knew it was a lie. He's lying to the guy who was in charge of the investigation and who knew better than anyone that it was a lie. And he's challenging Ashcroft, demanding to know why he is, in effect, protecting terrorists on the basis of known lies. Who does that? Pence, at the time he wrote the letter, had been a congressman for 18 months. Where does he get the balls to threaten the Attorney General for telling the truth? I think the answer is obvious. If you see some little punk-ass bitch threatening someone much bigger than them, you know it's because a much bigger dog has their back. Pence's letter was supposed to be about anthrax, but it mentioned Iraq 4 times. He was accusing Ashcroft of failing to cooperate with the efforts of the men who wanted to make war on Iraq, which means really that he was accusing Ashcroft of failing to cooperate with the men who brought down the towers, and who, as Ashcroft was discovering in his investigation, were also the men behind the anthrax attacks. The deadly mailings figured in the Bush administration's case for invading Iraq. This lie, that there was any evidence suggesting that the anthrax came from Iraq, was central to the Bush-Cheney case for war in Iraq. When Colin Powell went to the UN to lie his ass off In an effort to justify the coming murderous invasion, he waved around a vial of white powder and lied and said falsely that Iraq was stockpiling tons of this poison that had been used in attacking Washington. And Pence was part of that plot. Pence is an attack dog of sorts for the most dangerous big dogs on the planet in their attempts to kill millions of peaceful civilians around the world and destroy the lives of hundreds of thousands of Americans and piss away the country's treasure by the trillions. But did I mention that Mike Pence is also nuts?
And all of the public should know that God who put this country on these shores has placed strong men and women in the leadership of our national government for such a time as this.
This is all God's will, don't you see? The attacks were God's will because the war on Islam is also God's will, and all God needs you to do is trust these killers, the war makers, that God has placed in the leadership of our country.
It is said that fear is useless. What is needed is trust. And today we find yet one more reason to trust in the national government that has again earned our trust this day.
He lied. In addition to being a liar, there's a guy named Tory Smith, and okay, so I just want to give some background on what they do with people like Tory Smith. There was also the example of Cisco Wheeler. So these are their government mind control puppets that they create, and typically they're supposed to be killed off before they can ever talk. But in order to ensure that when they do talk, they sound like complete nut bars, they create these alien scenarios, this reptilian myth, I believe. So even Phil Schneider, who was an engineer who was working on these deep underground military bases, claimed that he was attacked by an alien. But I think what really happened with Phil is they knew he was going to talk about their underground MyLabs and stuff like that. So they created, either using holograms or some kind of genetically modified creature that they created in a lab, and some secret weaponry that they have, to attack Phil, so that when he came out to tell the truth about all these dastardly things that the government was doing in these dumps, that people would dismiss him and think he was crazy because of this alien attack. And he actually showed all these burns to his body from this like advanced weaponry, but I don't think it's extraterrestrial. Kathy O'Brien explained it, and what they do is, in order to scramble your brain, they use this holograph technology and stuff to get people to believe that there's these reptilian beings. And Kathy O'Brien described how George H.W. Bush had this like hologram, and at the time when she was under the mind control, it fooled her to think that he was some reptilian, some alien being, and that she was helpless against his power. And it was a very powerful experience, and she was convinced that this was going on. But then once she regained control of her mind, she was able to understand that this was a trick, and that they used this trick so that when people like Kathy O'Brien or Cisco Wheeler told their stories, they would talk about this reptilian stuff, which is just bunk, and then people would totally discredit them because of it. So that if she ever regained her mind and told her story, that she would be discredited with this bogus reptilian alien stuff that Tory Smith talked about.
Hello everyone, my name is Tory Smith, and I monitor a child trafficking operation which has 40 main locations in the United States. One of them is here in Indiana, which has been open for 27 years now, and then they have a multitude of other locations.
There's a major child trafficking operation going on, and it's owned by the Bush family and operated by DARPA and the CIA. And it's been a great money maker for DARPA, because if you like to rape 4-year-old girls, all you have to do is pay DARPA $43,000, and then they will allow you to rape a child. They do a huge amount of human experiments. I've personally been abducted to 14 out of 41 locations, and they never expected me to live to be able to tell you what I've witnessed. I share and report what I have seen, what I know to be true. What they would do in these MyLab child trafficking operations is they take the children and they strap them down to tables, they gang rape them, and they kill them in service to their Luciferian ideals or whatever you want to call it. Now they're taking the children and processing them in food and putting them into the Cowgirl meat supply. Cowgirl's heavily involved in this. And then the other day I was doing a DNA scan for someone who was having severe mental depression. I was checking him to see if he had eaten any of these children, because this processing plant is not far from me. It's in Minnesota. And the CIA agent goes, well, I don't know what you're so worried about. Most of that human meat was sent out of the country. Oh, well, that makes it all fine and dandy, doesn't it? Yeah, all these human children raped and murdered, and in the United States of America processed as food. But don't worry, because they're shipping the meat out of the country. That makes it all okay, right?
And one of their key players is a man who's acting as Indiana governor, who's named Mike Pence. The Bush family has been very good to Mike Pence, financing him and also providing him with other benefits. He has 16 bank accounts totaling just under $42 million. And 3 of these accounts are offshore and were generated by his participation in the war crimes in which he helped murder 6.1 million people. This is why Indiana Republicans just love him, because he's a child rapist and a child murderer and a war criminal. Because Indiana Republicans celebrate when the military murders helpless, innocent, weaponless people in other countries. Celebrate it. Well, the Democrats do too. I don't mean to single out the Republicans as being just filthy, low-life criminals, because the Democrats are too. I would like to make a special appeal to a child trafficker whose name is Karen Pence. Her husband just murdered his 51st child last weekend on Sunday, and it was an especially gory murder. He had the blood that was coming out of this little boy's rectum all over his penis while he was choking this child to death. Her husband, your husband, Mrs. Pence, has murdered 48 children by choking them to death during rape. Now, you've known about this since the 88th child that he's raped. When you found out that he had raped 88 children, your decision was to aid and abet him, to protect him, to help him to continue to rape more children.
So the things that give this guy, Tory Smith, credibility are that he's talking about MyLabs and DUMBs, which from my research, it's been proven that they do exist and that they do experiments on people and children in these MyLabs. So that gives him credibility. And the other thing that gives him credibility is that he's dead now. Shortly, it was either right before or right after Donald Trump announced his VP choice of Mike Pence, that Tory Smith, he ended up dead in the hospital. Right? And it seems really suspicious. Although he was sick, it still seems pretty suspicious, the timing of it.
But I'm old and I'm bitter, and they attack me every day. So maybe it's just being, I'm just tired of being attacked every day. Thank you. I love you.
I received a phone call from one of Tory's personal friends who lives close by him. And while all this was going on, she called me and said that she had visited Tory. And I was shocked because I had not heard from him and I was getting very concerned. She visited him last Saturday. She actually had some time to spend with him. She said he was about, he could stand up for maybe 5 minutes if he was lucky. And that he had lost over 100 pounds. He was literally so skinny, she couldn't even believe it. Very, very sickly, very exhausted, and she said the base of his feet and the balls of his feet had turned completely yellow. Now, she had arrived at his house because she had called to say that she wanted to bring her children over to see him. She had seen his video. She was afraid she was never going to see him again. And when she arrived, he was not at his home. She went to a neighbor who called his mother, and the mother came over and let them into the home. She then went over to see Tory, and they sat on the swing, and they talked for a while. And he just said that he was on his way home. He was going back to Agartha, and he wasn't going to be here much longer. And he was good with that. And she said he was very kind of somber and exhausted, and of course not himself. That was last Saturday. None of us knew until, I believe, Thursday afternoon or Friday morning that Tori had actually passed. And he was being taken care of by his 90-plus-year-old mother, and he had begged her to not be taken to the hospital. He kept saying over and over again that he knew what they were going to do if she took him to the hospital. Well, she did. And I'm hearing from some guidance that he actually was taken out once he arrived at the hospital. Believe it or not, he was starting to get a little bit better after such severe illness and prolonged attack on all of his body, organs, systems, and fields.
Before Donald Trump even got the Republican nomination, I recommended that he select John DeCamp as his vice president. And unfortunately, that didn't happen. However, it's not too late. I think that if Donald Trump got rid of Mike Pence and replaced him with John DeCamp, we would see the arrest of George H.W. Bush, probably his son, probably some of his brothers, definitely Bill and Hillary Clinton, along with many, many, many high-level government officials that have been involved in these scandals since the Franklin cover-up back in the 80s. And John DeCamp was not only a master legislator and an amazing investigative lawyer who discovered this scandalous activity going on at the White House. He also has like one of the sexiest political campaigns that ever existed. He ran a successful campaign to obtain the state Senate seat in Nebraska while he was in Vietnam, saving Vietnamese children to prevent the possibility of an assassination, which they're talking about all over the place. I think he should get rid of Mike Pence and replace him with John DeCamp, because the only person who would probably scare these political elite criminals more than Donald Trump has is John DeCamp. So that would be my recommendation. Anyway, I'll leave it at that. Thank you so much for watching. Go out there and have an amazing day. And before I go, I want everybody to know that I'm a firm believer that in this life, absolutely anybody can be, do, and have anything they want, or we can have everything we want. And I choose everything, and I hope you will too, because you can. So just ask me how. Have an amazing day. And if I don't see you in the future, I'll see you out here in the pasture. Thanks for watching, y'all. Bye-bye.